Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into what it actually means to connect with God. Like really connect with God.
Yeah.
On a deeper level,
Right.
We're talking about going way beyond just routines and rituals and all that.
Right.
We're trying to get at that kind of faith that just feels truly alive each and every day.
Yeah.
And the source material we're going to be using for this deep dive is a podcast called A Love Beyond Religion. God wants a relationship, not rituals.
It's a pretty powerful title. And I think the episode really challenges us to kind of rethink our approach to faith.
Okay.
They start off with this really thought-provoking analogy, comparing God to a vine and people to the branches.
Right, like in John 15:5.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's more than just an image, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, what does it actually look like to see ourselves as branches drawing life from the vine?
Yeah, it's about understanding where our strength comes from, where our purpose comes from.
Okay.
Think about it this way. A branch can't produce fruit on its own. It needs that constant connection to the vine to thrive.
Right.
In the same way, our relationship with God, it isn't just about checking off boxes, prayers, good deeds.
Yeah.
It's about drawing nourishment and direction from that connection.
So it's not just about actions, but about where those actions are coming from. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I've totally done that. I've gone through the motions without really connecting. Have you ever felt that way?
Absolutely.
Like you're doing all the right things, but there's just something's missing.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
And the podcast calls that religiosity versus relationship.
Right.
And I think that's a really important distinction. It's like the difference between a scheduled phone call and just texting with a friend throughout the day.
Yeah.
One is about fulfilling an obligation. The other is about just a constant flowing connection.
Right. And that kind of makes me think about what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians about praying without ceasing.
Right.
It's not about set times or rituals, but it's just this ongoing dialogue with God.
Yeah.
But how do we actually live that out? I mean, I've had those times where I've left church feeling so inspired, but then life happens and those feelings, they kind of fade.
Yeah, that's so real. You hit on a point that really resonated with me too when I was listening to this.
Okay.
How do we bring God home with us? It's easy to feel connected when you're in a church setting, but how do we maintain that in our everyday lives?
Yeah.
The podcast suggests that sometimes we just kind of leave God at the church door, unintentionally, of course.
Right.
But because we just fall back into routines that might not align with our faith.
So it's about recognizing that every choice we make, everything we do, everything we say, everything we think,
it all matters.
It all affects our connection with God. It's like those choices can either draw us closer to Him or create distance.
Exactly. And that brings us to the idea of holiness. And think of it like this. It's about becoming more like Christ, aligning our lives with His values.
Okay.
But it's not about being perfect because none of us are.
Right.
It's about recognizing that our actions have consequences and striving to live in a way that honors God.
That makes a lot more sense than just trying to be good all the time.
Right.
Which can feel impossible.
Exactly. So much pressure.
So much pressure. Yeah. So it's about being mindful of how our actions impact our relationship with God.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of connection, but the podcast also uses this really striking image of God desiring a bride.
Yes.
It's a powerful metaphor, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Biblically speaking, the idea of a bride emphasizes purity and intimacy.
Yes.
It's this picture of a deep personal connection, not just following rules.
Right.
It makes you think about what kind of relationship God truly desires with us. It's not about keeping score. It's about that deep, intimate connection. Exactly. And it ties into what Hebrews 12:14 says about sanctification being necessary to see the Lord.
Right.
The idea is that our pursuit of holiness, of becoming more like Christ, it's directly connected to our ability to experience God more fully.
So it all circles back to that idea of faith, especially in a world that's full of doubt and distractions. Have you ever felt that sense of God's presence in your life? What was that like for you?
Yeah, for me, it's about cultivating an awareness of God throughout the day.
Okay.
It's those moments of gratitude, recognizing His hand in both the big and the small things, and inviting His guidance into my decisions.
Okay.
It's like a constant conversation.
Yeah.
Seeking.
I love that. It's about actively seeking that presence, that connection, rather than just waiting for it to happen. But the podcast doesn't just leave us with these big ideas. It also gives us some really practical tips for strengthening our connection with God.
It does.
Okay, so what are some of the highlights for you? What are those practical steps that really resonated?
Well, the first one is so simple but so powerful. Talk to God like a friend.
Okay.
Not just formal prayer,
Right.
but just having an ongoing dialogue,
Uh-huh.
sharing our hearts, just like we would with someone we love and trust.
Hmm.
And it's amazing how just shifting our perspective on prayer can make such a difference.
Okay.
Instead of seeing it as a chore
Yeah.
or a list of requests,
Right.
we can approach it as a conversation with a close friend.
That takes the pressure off, doesn't it?
It does.
It reminds me of something the podcast said about the Bible.
Okay.
It's not just a rule book.
Right.
It's a way to get to know God's character, to understand his heart.
Exactly. Think of it like getting to know a friend through their letters or their favorite books.
Yeah.
You start to see the world through their eyes,
Uh-huh.
understand their values, appreciate their sense of humor even. Reading the Bible with that mindset can bring it to life in a whole new way.
It becomes less about memorizing verses and more about experiencing God's story and discovering how it connects to our own.
Yeah.
The podcast also emphasizes that seeking God's presence isn't limited to specific times or places.
Right. We don't have to wait for Sunday morning or a designated quiet time.
Right.
It's about finding those pockets of time throughout the day to connect with God.
Okay.
It could be a moment of awe at a beautiful sunset,
Yeah.
a silent prayer before a challenging meeting,
Yeah.
or simply just taking a walk in nature and feeling his peace.
It's about weaving those moments of connection into the fabric of our everyday lives.
Exactly.
But let's be honest, life gets busy.
Yeah.
Distractions are everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's easy to let that connection slip.
Yeah.
What are some practical ways that we can keep that awareness of God alive throughout the day?
One thing that's helped me is practicing gratitude.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on what's going wrong,
Uh-huh.
I try to intentionally look for what's going right and recognize those blessings as gifts from God.
Yeah.
And it shifts my perspective. It helps me to reconnect with that sense of awe and appreciation.
It's like hitting a mini reset button for your mind, right?
Yes,
Reminding yourself of all the good in your life and attributing it to God's goodness.
exactly.
I love that.
Another practice that's been helpful is incorporating short prayers or moments of reflection throughout the day.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything elaborate.
Right.
It could be as simple as pausing for a few seconds before a meal to thank God for providing for you, or taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of nature and acknowledge him as the creator.
It's not about adding more tasks to your to-do list, but about finding those natural pauses in your day and infusing them with the sense of the sacred.
Exactly. It's about making your faith a natural part of your life,
Yeah.
not something that you compartmentalize.
And that brings me to the idea of being honest with God.
Yeah.
Even in our struggles, even in our doubts. The podcast talks about how important it is to acknowledge those feelings.
Yeah.
Not try to hide them or pretend they don't exist. But how do we do that when we're feeling discouraged or distant from him? It can be hard to know where to even begin.
I think that's where vulnerability comes in.
Okay.
It's about saying to God, hey, I'm struggling right now. I feel lost. I feel confused, and I need your help.
Yeah.
It's like going to a loving parent when you're hurting. We don't have to pretend to be perfect for our parents. We can
Right.
come to them with our messy, imperfect selves, knowing that they love us unconditionally.
And God is the ultimate loving parent, right?
Yes.
He doesn't expect us to have it all figured out.
Nope.
He wants us to come to him just as we are with all of our doubts and questions.
Exactly. And it's in those moments of weakness
Yeah.
when we surrender our pride and acknowledge our need for him that he
Right.
can truly meet us and work in our lives.
It's a beautiful paradox, isn't it?
It is.
Our weakness can become our strength. When we surrender it to God, it seems like we keep coming back to this idea that a deeper connection with God isn't a destination, it's a journey.
Absolutely.
There are going to be ups and downs, moments of closeness, moments of distance.
That's so true. It's an ongoing process of growing and evolving in our relationship with God.
Right.
And just like any relationship, it takes effort, it takes intentionality, and it takes a willingness to work through the challenges.
So how do we navigate those inevitable seasons of doubt or dryness? When it feels like our prayers are bouncing off the ceiling and our connection with God feels strained, what do we do?
First of all, it's important to remember that those seasons are normal.
Okay.
Every believer goes through them at some point.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean your faith is weak
Okay.
or that God has abandoned you. It's simply part of the journey.
That's reassuring to hear because it's easy to feel like you're the only one struggling when you're in the midst of it.
And that's where community becomes so important.
Okay.
Surround yourself with other believers who can support you. Right.
Encourage you and pray for you during those difficult times.
Yeah.
Having that safe space to share your doubts and struggles without judgment can make a huge difference.
It's about remembering that we weren't meant to do this alone.
Right.
We need each other.
We do. And sometimes just talking it out with someone who understands can help you see things from a different perspective.
Right.
Or gain some new insights.
Yeah. It's not about pretending everything is okay, but about being honest with yourself and with others about where you're at. And that honesty, that vulnerability can actually draw you closer to God and to others.
It's about letting people into your struggles, letting them see your imperfections, and allowing them to love and support you through it.
Right.
That's what true community is all about.
And it's in those moments of weakness and vulnerability that we often experience God's grace and strength most powerfully. When we surrender our pride and acknowledge our need for Him, He can step in and do incredible things in our lives and through our relationships.
Yeah.
As we talk about all this, I'm realizing that developing a deeper connection with God isn't just about our own personal growth or fulfillment.
Right.
It affects how we interact with the world around us.
You're absolutely right. It's about becoming more like Christ and reflecting His love to others. As we experience God's love and forgiveness, we're more likely to extend that same love and forgiveness to those around us.
It's like that love overflows from us and spills out onto the people we encounter.
And it changes how we see people. Instead of judging or criticizing, we start to see them through the lens of God's love, recognizing their inherent worth and dignity.
So it's not about isolating ourselves in some spiritual bubble.
Yeah.
It's about letting our relationship with God transform how we engage with the world.
It's about becoming more selfless, more forgiving, more patient, and more kind. It's about reflecting Christ's love in every interaction, in every relationship, in every aspect of our lives.
That's a beautiful vision, but I'll be honest, it doesn't always feel easy.
It's not.
Especially when we're dealing with difficult people or challenging situations. It can be really hard to maintain that love and compassion. What do we do when we're feeling hurt or frustrated? How do we keep from reacting in ways that don't reflect God's love?
I think that's where the power of prayer comes in.
Okay.
When we're struggling to love someone, we can bring them before God and ask Him to help us see them through His eyes.
Right.
We can ask Him to soften our hearts, to give us His heart for them, and to give us the strength to love them even when it's hard.
It's about acknowledging our own limitations and relying on God's strength to love beyond our own capacity.
Exactly. And it's a beautiful thing when we allow God to work through us in that way. It's not about our own efforts or our own ability to love. It's about allowing God's love to flow through us and touch the lives of those around us.
And that kind of love can be incredibly transformative.
It is.
Both for ourselves and for the people that we interact with. It creates this ripple effect, spreading kindness and compassion throughout our communities and beyond.
And that's ultimately what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sharing God's love with the world and making a difference in the lives of others. It all starts with cultivating that deep, personal connection with God.
A connection that is available to everyone.
It is.
No matter where you are on your spiritual journey, God is waiting with open arms to welcome you into His presence.
It's an invitation that we can choose to accept every single day.
And as we do, we'll discover that our lives become richer, more meaningful, and more filled with purpose.
It's about finding that true joy and fulfillment that comes from knowing and loving God.
And that joy, that peace, that love, it's something the world desperately needs.
And that reminds me of something else the podcast talked about.
Okay.
It was this idea of clinging to God's faithfulness.
Okay.
Even when we don't feel His presence. Even when we're struggling to believe, we can hold on to that truth that He is always with us.
Right.
His love never fails.
It's like clinging to a lifeline when you're being tossed around in a stormy sea.
That's such a good way to put it. It really is.
Those promises, those anchors of truth, they can keep us from being swept away by our doubts and fears.
Absolutely. And, sometimes it helps to just look back on our own lives.
Okay.
And remember those times when God has been faithful? Those moments when He answered a prayer or brought us through a difficult situation?
Those memories, those personal testimonies, they can be so powerful.
They really can.
They remind us of God's goodness.
And
His unwavering love for us, even when we're feeling lost or discouraged.
Another piece of advice the podcast offered was the importance of processing our doubts and fears in a healthy way.
So not bottling them up or pretending they don't exist,
Yeah.
but actually confronting them head on.
Exactly. Whether it's through journaling, talking to a trusted friend or mentor,
Yeah.
maybe seeking professional counseling,
Mm.
finding a safe space to express those difficult emotions can be so important.
Sometimes just getting those feelings out in the open can take away some of their power.
It really can. It's like letting the air out of a balloon.
Exactly.
And it creates space for healing and growth. As we process those doubts and fears in a healthy way, we can begin to understand them better and find ways to address them.
And I think that's where community plays such a crucial role.
It really does.
You know, having those supportive relationships with other believers who can offer encouragement, prayer, accountability can make all the difference.
We weren't created to walk this journey alone. We need each other, and those relationships can truly be a lifeline.
Right.
Especially when we're going through a tough time.
It's knowing that you're not the only one wrestling with doubt, that there are others who understand what you're going through and can offer support and guidance. It's a beautiful picture of the body of Christ working together.
And sometimes just knowing that someone is praying for you can give you the strength to keep going.
So it's not about having all the answers or pretending to be some kind of super Christian.
Right.
It's about being willing to be vulnerable, to ask for help, and to lean on those who love and support us.
And as we do that, as we practice that vulnerability, as we lean on others, I think we'll find that our faith actually becomes stronger, more resilient, and more deeply rooted in God's love.
It's like exercising a muscle, you know? The more we face those challenges and overcome them, the more equipped we are to handle whatever life throws our way.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the Christian faith. It's not about avoiding hardship, but it's about finding hope and strength in the midst of it. It's about knowing that even when we stumble, even when we fall, God is always there to pick us up, dust us off, and set us back on the right path.
That's such an encouraging thought.
Yeah.
I mean, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing that you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
I think more than anything, I just hope they're inspired to cultivate a deeper and more authentic relationship with God.
Okay.
One that goes beyond, simply checking off boxes or following rules, but one that is marked by intimacy, honesty, and a willingness to grow.
A relationship that sustains us through the highs and lows of life, providing hope, strength, and a love that never lets us go.
And I truly believe that as we pursue that kind of relationship, our lives will be transformed in ways that we never thought possible. We'll discover a joy and a peace that surpasses all understanding, and we'll be empowered to live lives that reflect the love of Christ to a world that desperately needs it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep seeking that deeper connection with God. Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. It's been an incredible conversation so far, really exploring what it means to move beyond just those surface level religious practices. And actually cultivate a real, a vibrant and genuine connection with God.
It really has. We've covered so much ground already.
We have.
From understanding that depth of connection that God desires to, practical everyday steps that we can take to actually nurture that relationship.
And we even touched on how that connection spills over into our interactions with others. Inspiring us to become more compassionate and loving people.
Absolutely.
But one thing that struck me as we were kind of prepping for this deep dive is we haven't really talked about what happens when things get tough. When we face doubt, fear, those inevitable dry spells in our faith journey.
Right, because life isn't always easy, and our faith is bound to be tested at some point. And, the podcast that we're discussing today, it doesn't shy away from that reality at all.
In fact, it almost seems to embrace those challenges.
It does.
Suggesting that wrestling with our faith can actually become like a catalyst for growth.
Exactly. It's not about avoiding hardship, but about learning how to walk through those difficult seasons in a way that actually strengthens our faith rather than weakens it. And the podcast offers some really helpful advice on how to do that.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What are some of those nuggets of wisdom that stood out to you?
One thing that really resonated with me was this idea of remembering God's faithfulness.
Okay.
Even when we don't feel his presence, even when we're struggling to believe.
Yeah.
We can hold on to that truth that he is always with us. His love never fails.
It's like clinging to a lifeline when you're being tossed around in a stormy sea.
Right. That's a good visual.
You know, those promises, those
Yeah.
anchors of truth, they can keep us from being swept away by our doubts and our fears.
Absolutely. And sometimes, it really helps to just look back on our own lives.
Okay.
And remember those times when God has been faithful.
Yeah.
Those moments when he answered a prayer or brought us through a difficult situation.
Those memories, those personal testimonies, they can be so powerful.
They really can.
They remind us of God's goodness.
Yeah.
And his unwavering love for us, even when we're feeling lost or discouraged.
Another piece of advice the podcast offered was the importance of finding healthy ways to process our doubts and fears.
So not bottling them up or pretending they don't exist,
Right.
but actually confronting them head on.
Exactly. Whether it's through journaling,
Okay.
talking to a trusted friend or mentor, maybe seeking professional counseling.
Yeah.
Finding that safe space to express those difficult emotions is so important.
Sometimes just getting those feelings out in the open can take away some of their power.
It really can. It's like letting the air out of a balloon.
Exactly. It's like, there we go.
And it creates space for healing and for growth.
Okay.
And as we process those doubts and fears in a healthy way,
Yeah.
we can begin to understand them better and find ways to address them.
And I think that's where community plays such a crucial role.
It really does.
Having those supportive relationships with other believers who can offer encouragement, prayer, accountability can make all the difference.
It can. We weren't created to walk this journey alone.
Right.
We need each other. And those relationships, they can truly be a lifeline.
Right.
Especially when we're going through a tough time.
It's knowing that you're not the only one wrestling with doubt, that there are others who understand what you're going through and can offer support and guidance. It's a beautiful picture of the body of Christ working together.
And sometimes just knowing that someone is praying for you can give you the strength to keep going.
So it's not about having all the answers or pretending to be some kind of super Christian.
No.
It's about being willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Ask for help and to lean on those who love and support us.
And as we do that, as we practice that vulnerability, as we lean on others, I think we'll find that our faith actually becomes stronger, more resilient, and more deeply rooted in God's love.
It's like exercising a muscle.
Yes.
The more we face those challenges and overcome them, the more equipped we are to handle whatever life throws our way.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the Christian faith. It's not about avoiding hardship.
Right.
But it's about finding hope and strength in the midst of it.
Yeah.
It's about knowing that even when we stumble, even when we fall, God is always there to pick us up, dust us off, and set us back on the right path.
That's such an encouraging thought.
It is.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing that you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
More than anything, I just hope they're inspired to cultivate that deeper, more authentic relationship with God.
Oh, yeah.
One that goes beyond simply checking off boxes or following rules, but one that's marked by intimacy, honesty, and a willingness to grow.
A relationship that sustains us through the highs and lows of life.
Absolutely.
Providing hope, strength, and a love that never lets us go.
And I truly believe that as we pursue that kind of relationship, our lives will be transformed in ways that we never thought possible. We'll discover a joy and a peace that surpasses all understanding, and we'll be empowered to live lives that reflect the love of Christ to a world that desperately needs it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great.
Until next time, keep seeking that deeper connection with God.